Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 128. We're going to be asking our guests the question, what was your first scary movie and what was the damage? And we are going to be having the guests, Monique Jenkinson, aka Fauxnique, Peaches Christ, Stephen Intermill, Meg Elison, Daniel Coffeen, and Carmen Maria Machado. You can email us at whattthe, WHATTHE, at scarythoughts.org. Okay, before we proceed, we got a couple of plugs. Let's plug the Terror Vault. It's that time of year.
Yep. This year it is Hexed, which is a witch-themed haunted performance. And we saw it early on in the season, and it was great as always.
Super fun. It's a haunt. It's live theater. It's at the Old Mint in San Francisco. I believe there are still tickets available, and it goes slightly past Halloween. Highly, highly recommended.
Yeah, get the VIP tickets too, because there's like a little speakeasy thing that is pretty rad to go into.
It's worth paying the extra, and to do the full immersion, which you can get these glow necklaces, which means you get full contact with the actors and get much more involved in what scares you.
Yes, you definitely want to be touched by a stranger at Terror Vault.
In the darkness. I also wanted to plug, we just saw Rocky Horror live at Oasis SF. So it's not the movie, there's no shadow cast, it's just the cast. And the cast was amazing. It's also special because it's at the Oasis in San Francisco. And, I don't know if you know, Oasis will be closing at the end of this year. So this is like their last chance to do it and could be your last chance to go there and see anything. And that's going to be running like the Terror Vault just past Halloween. There might still be tickets left. Also highly recommended.
I've seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show hundreds of times in the theater, and I've never seen a live performance.
I think that was my first time, maybe. And it was great. It was super fun because, you're getting these interpretations of those characters, but without the original behind them, or showing up afterwards. It was great. All right. Should we just jump into it?
Yeah, like for Halloween, we're always trying to do something fun and special. And so instead of doing one movie, we've asked this question that you've posed to this rogues gallery. Basically, we all kind of remember some sort of horror movie that was our first one, and we all saw it like too young, too late, with bad kids often.
Well, here live in our studio is our first guest, Monique Jenkinson, aka Fauxnique, who are you going to riff on her bio? Should we make her do it?
Yeah, I always like when she does it because
oh my god, she's squinting and shaking her head.
That's what's kind of fun. That's what's fun about it.
I guess that just makes it your responsibility. Please welcome Fauxnique.
Oh my god. I like hearing what other people think my bio is. Hi, I'm Monique Jenkinson, aka Fauxnique. Do I need to contextualize myself? I'm a drag queen, and I'm also a maker of dance-based performance that bridges the space between cabaret and contemporary dance.
Speaking of which, and speaking of plugs, do you have anything to plug, Ms. Fauxnique?
I do. I have, speaking of our friend Peaches Christ, whom you'll be hearing from later, Peaches Christ and Edwin Outwater, who is a wonderful conductor, have co-produced an event called Smells Like Queen Spirit, an evening of gay grunge. So it's drag queens and a live band led by Andy Meyerson. I just came from rehearsal and it was so fun and felt so fierce to be singing with this amazing band. And they're truly an amazing band. The lineup is great. So that's next Monday, November 3rd. So keep celebrating with some gay grunge.
Thank you, Monique.
Oh, and doors are at 6:45, shows at 7:30, and it is at a venue in San Francisco called the Roar Shack, and that is on 7th Street at Market. And tickets are available at peacheschrist.com.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get to it. What was your first horror movie and what was the damage?
Well, I kind of have two stories that don't quite, I feel like in a way they don't quite qualify, but the damage was deep. So I think this is why I bring them up. So the first one was, I think I was about 9, and I was taken to see, a friend and I were taken to see, I think by my mother or maybe someone else's mother, to see David Lynch's The Elephant Man. And I was not ready for it. I think someone literally thought it was about a circus or something, or about elephants. Whoever brought us to this did not know what they were getting us into. And it was horrifying in so many ways. It's an incredible film, but I actually have not seen it since. And I've always wanted to see the play, but this horrific disease that this man suffered from disfigurement. For those of you who don't know, the story of the Elephant Man was the story of a guy called Joseph Merrick. For some reason, they changed his name to John Merrick in the play. That's okay. Yeah, I don't know why, but and he suffered from a disease, the name of which I do not remember, but it basically is gigantic tumors all over his head and face and body. And he lived in Victorian England and was kind of in a sideshow as the quote unquote Elephant Man. And in the play and film, he's befriended by the actress Lily Langtry, and she kind of shows him empathy. And it's just about this horrifying life of this person afflicted by this thing. So you see this man going through these trials and victimized and ridiculed and suffering from this disfiguring, debilitating thing. And I think it broke my little brain. And it's interesting though, when I first saw it, I think around age 9, I did a little bit of thinking and research about this as I was revisiting this. And I think that is around the age when you're starting to develop empathy. So I actually think that this being taken to see this shocking film, or rather this film that was shocking to my little child nervous system and brain, was maybe happened in a way at the right time, because I think it did like engage, kind of like plug in my sense of empathy. I just was, of course there was like the selfish fear that I was going to wake up afflicted by this disease, but also I think I just did a lot of weeping about why people are so mean to other people and victimize other people. So yeah, it was intense. So that's the first one. And then I have another one, but we can unpack that one.
Well, no, I think it's interesting that you're describing a movie that isn't a horror movie, but it certainly affected you like a horror movie. A lot of the words you were using to describe your experience of it are the words that anyone would describe their first horror movie with. Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, yes, I think now that I'm remembering it, I think I remember leaving the theater sobbing and greeting my mother, and maybe leaving the film early. I don't remember if we were taken out of the theater early, but yeah, I was totally traumatized.
I was taken out of the theater early when I saw Fox and the Hound as a little kid. It's the earliest movie I can remember seeing. And, spoiler alert, when the fox gets shot,
Yes.
I for a long time thought the fox just died, because I never saw the end of the film until a few years later. And it's my earliest film memory. It's not my pick as my earliest horror movie, but it's my earliest memory of seeing a film. And it was traumatic for a lot of the same reasons.
Yeah.
And then I had read the Elephant Man's bio when I was a little kid, because I don't know if you remember, but there's all the rumors that Michael Jackson owned the Elephant Man skeleton,
Yes.
which is not true.
Yes.
So it was just sort of mixed up in that sort of if you're into Michael Jackson, it's just part of the myth, and you would maybe explore that if you were like a reader child.
Yes. Well, now I'd love to revisit it. John Hurt starred in it. I think he also was on stage as John Merrick. And then Anne Bancroft was in it. And I'm trying to remember. I know
Anthony
there
Hopkins.
and Anthony Hopkins,
Yeah.
right? Ooh, maybe we do need to revisit it.
I would totally cover that here. I love that movie like a lot. Like a lot of the history. You know, Mel Brooks produced it. Mel Brooks
Right.
handpicked David Lynch to direct it after seeing Eraserhead, and like that, it's the only thing that he ever did. I mean, there's a whole thing about David Lynch wanted to do the makeup himself, and so he basically did like it was a failure, but he did like a giant version of the Eraserhead baby, kind of was as it was described, using like meat pieces, and it eventually it was a disaster.
Right.
And so they brought in like, you know, like one of Spielberg's guys or something like that. And then they went and like cast off of the castings that the Royal Museum or wherever had of John Merrick or Joseph Merrick. Yeah. And that's how they made it. But it is great special effects, especially for its time.
Yeah, it really was. And it's in black and white. So I think there was something, it gives you this it does that thing that old movies do that I think I can't put my finger on somehow. In removing color, you know, we focus on shadow, right? And it does kind of ground it in a Victorian milieu somehow, even though, of course, you know, color existed, but its perspective is like a perspective we would have from looking at early photographs. And that I think was a really good choice. I can't remember where it falls in the order of David Lynch's
It's
film.
right after the Eraserhead.
Eraserhead's just it's quite early. I want to say, I mean, this would have been 1980, you know, that I saw it.
Yeah.
Either 79 or 80 that it was made.
Yeah, David Lynch talks about in Room to Dream, which is like his weird bio that he does with his daughter, where they have kind of like a back and forth. She describes it, and then he describes the same scene. It's pretty cool. They just talk about how he goes, and David Lynch is like sitting outside of a movie theater that they've like reserved to watch Eraserhead, and he's just sitting outside like a little boy on a chair waiting. And then Mel Brooks goes in with everybody, and they're like, okay, we're going to go check this movie out. We'll let you know. And it's basically his audition for it. And Mel Brooks comes out and goes, you're a madman. I love it. And you got the job. And that's the whole thing. And like Eraserhead is not made like a normal movie in any way. So, you know, like it's not like you have 5 years to make The Elephant Man. So it's really like a pretty bold choice for Mel Brooks, who is a fucking gangster by all accounts.
Totally. And a genius.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's something that I had forgotten about, the whole Mel Brooks piece. And that's something that's so, to me, also that a comedian wanted to make this film.
Yeah. I wonder if it had a little bit of thing like when he went to do The Fly with Cronenberg, it's after Young Frankenstein. So the studio is kind of like, just do that with The Fly. And he's like, okay. And then goes and makes this fucking nightmare with Jeff Goldblum.
Right.
Yeah.
What was your other early movie?
It wasn't really an early movie. It was it was on the playground. I want to say when I had to have been in second or third grade. And there was this girl, these two sisters, super creepy girls at my school. Really, really skinny. They both had their hair slicked and pulled back so tight. It was like their mom slicked their ponytails back so tight that it was straining their little skin and like pulled. And then they had these ponytails. One was older and one was younger, but they looked identical. Sisters.
Yeah.
One was just a little bit littler. And they had their like pulled back crazy ponytail and then ringlets. So imagine this girl with like pulled back ponytail, super, super tight, slicked down to her head, then ringlets in the ponytail, a little bow, almost translucent blue white skin, and severely thin. One of the girls had broken her arm really badly. So she had this crazy scar and couldn't totally straighten one of her arms. And then this is whatever 1978, 79. So they're wearing like whatever 70s clothes, but very tidy. And the older girl would gather people at recess and tell them the plots of horror movies.
These sound like Flannery O'Connor characters.
Totally. And just like she would severely like hold court and tell us. So I remember her telling us like the whole plot of the Amityville Horror. And that just scared me. I was like super scared of our house being haunted. I didn't want to go in my closet. This must have been when we lived in Modesto, because I had a kind of like creepy closet that I wasn't afraid of until then. And then like after that, and it was like, we had this house that had all kinds of like crazy 70s like wallpaper that my parents steamed off and took down, and like paneling, like redwood paneling that like they took the redwood paneling down. It was just like a massive silverfish underneath it. Like it was so
No thanks.
weird and gross. And so, yeah, they just did all of this work. And then, but like my closet, they just like left this like weird red flocked wallpaper in my closet. And so I had this weird like red room closet.
That's like our house. Somebody left the ancient
Yeah.
shit in the closet. So it looks like you go back in time.
Totally. So I was suddenly very afraid of my like red wallpapered closet after this creepy girl and her silent sister. So she would tell the story and her sister would just kind of sit there silently. And she'd tell all, and all the kids would just like flock to hear. I hope she's a fierce goth now. Like I hope she's a fierce witch, like doing something cool.
She could be a juggalo.
Like, in a band.
More likely a juggalo.
She could be a juggalo.
Modesto.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Whoop whoop.
That's true. But yeah, of these ideas, there's more ideas. And I'm trying to remember the first scary movie I really saw. I mean, it might have been at a slumber party and seeing the Amityville Horror, but the things that are scary about it are like the music, like the theme music.
It's a shame that there's not like an adult version of like a slumber party sort of experience, because there's just something about like staying up all night with a few people and watching those movies. I'm sure there's probably some fucking polyamory couples out there that do this shit in a really awful, cringy way.
Absolutely.
But I mean, like when you're a kid and you do it, it's like a totally different deal.
Well, to my mind, as an adult, it would be like a drug buy gone wrong would be the adult version. Like you have this adventure, but it's real.
Right. Well, I was going to say the closest thing I've been at that was like this was the early in the days of the Shack. Peaches Christ and Vinsantos and Putanesca did the Russian River Massacre. So it was like it was an overnight party at the Russian River, and they screened Friday the 13th outside in the woods. And it was really fun.
You guys have described some of the events of those parties, and it's like, I mean, you guys have to take some of that to your grave. I mean, they sound amazing.
Yeah. It was, great. And I think, someone came out of the woods with, a fake chainsaw, et cetera, et cetera. It was great. And pumpkin carving contests, et cetera. So what about you guys?
Well, we're going to get
You're going to get to that. You'll get to that. Okay.
Thanks, Monique.
Thank
that was
you.
Great.
I feel like I want to talk so much more because I'm used to like full episodes where we just have a long conversation.
Let's do the Elephant
that's
Man.
All you get.
Yeah, Elephant Man for sure.
Okay,
we'll
Elephant Man.
You're allowed back for more time for the Elephant Man.
Great. Thanks, you guys. This is a delight.
Thanks for visiting your living room.
Thanks for doing this in my living room.
All right, second up is Meg Elison. She's an award-winning author and essayist of science fiction, horror, and feminist cultural criticism. She's got great books. The Book of the Unnamed Midwife is part of a really great apocalyptic trilogy. The Pill, I mean, it was like written before we're in our current Ozempic moment, but it's so prescient, it's insane. Find Layla is like kind of a kid's book. Number One Fan is super dark. And she's just won all kinds of awards, like the Philip K. Dick Award, the Hugo Nebula. She's in McSweeney's. I personally think she's like a hero of mine. Like she has this note in her little bio that not her little bio, but her bio that's like high school dropout, Cal Berkeley graduate, and it's like so I don't know, like that's like me, so I
That's
root
your
for her.
people.
Yeah, yeah. So I was so pleased that she rejoined us again.
Okay, so there are two possible answers to this. The first is that I was obsessed with the Neverending Story and I had it on VHS at a very young age. It is ostensibly a movie made for children, but it's a European movie and it's a lot scarier than American movies for kids were at the time, or much scarier than American movies are for kids now. So the sequences in the Neverending Story with the Gamork are a horror movie. Like it's not just the Nothing, it's the Nothing's attack wolf. So that is the first movie I remember being terrified of and like fully buying that the evil was real and that it could get me.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other possible answer is probably when I was about 8 or 9, somebody rented the movie Warlock.
That movie rules.
That movie rules, but it was way too scary for me as a kid. And it took me years to figure out what it even was because the only scene I remembered was the scene where one guy bites the tongue out of the other guy's mouth.
This is a bit of a theme so far, is that people have a memory of a horror movie that they saw and didn't know what it was until years later.
I think that's going to be pretty common because when you're a kid, you see these parts of movies or even the whole movie, but what you remember is what spiked your nervous system. So the parts of the movie that stay with you are going to be the most upsetting, the most terrifying, but not enough context clues without some very fancy Googling to figure out what it actually was.
And in those two things that you just mentioned, what was that sort of resonance for you that stayed with you?
I think in both cases, the answer is good practical effects because when you're that young, you don't really have the understanding that what you're seeing isn't real. So I didn't understand that the Gamork was a puppet. To me, that was a real animal that was a real threat. And they do such a good job with the lighting in that scene. They keep it very dim so that the parts of him that gleam are his eyes and his teeth. And the rest of the light is sort of swallowed up in fur and very lifelike skin texture. So it feels real. And then in the case of Warlock, there's a ton of blood. I mean, it's just blisters and blisters and blisters of blood. But they also do a really good job with making the tongue that is extracted look meaty. Like it's not, I don't even think it's latex. I think they use like a chewed up piece of kidney or something. So in both cases, I have a rich sense memory of like I'm only seeing these images and hearing the sounds, but in my brain, I smell it, I taste blood in the air, I know the scent of the predator when it's around me. Like it feels extremely rich because the quality of the effects is so real.
Very visceral.
Yeah.
And did those things nonetheless get you curious about scary movies, or did they freak you out and you couldn't see another scary movie for a long time?
I really wanted more scary movies. It made me very curious about what else there was. And I remember both of those examples being not what I thought a scary movie was. Because, the stories they tell you as a kid are about ghosts and vampires, and it's all like very fantasy creatures. And although The Neverending Story is a fantasy film, the Gamork is just a predator. Like it's not a magical predator. I mean, I guess it talks. But other than that, all of its qualities are essentially animalistic. And the the scene in Warlock, although they are warlocks and they do magic later on, is just an assault, like a terrifying animalistic assault. So they both felt very real. And I remember the sort of dissonance as a small child because what they tell you is it's not real, it couldn't happen, that's not a real thing in the world. Those are both real things. So I felt that I was being extremely lied to. Like maybe there aren't vampires, maybe they're right about that. But the truth is there are really scary things that are real. And it seemed to me that horror movies were sort of a map to that, and I needed the map because I was in the territory.
And so, what map did you use to find those maps?
I really loved books as a kid and I dove into the scariest books I could find. I think a lot of us have as an text the original Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, not only because there's some classic scary stories in there, but also because the quality of the illustrations is so grimy and
Yeah.
terrifying. Once again, pointing to practical effects, like it's all exposed bone and matted hair and like disgusting congealed pools. And they do that with line drawings, which is spectacular. But I was also one of those kids who moved into reading Stephen King and Dean Koontz and Shirley Jackson at a very young age. And I felt like I had been authorized to read adult horror because I'd already seen so many scary things.
I think another thing that's interesting that's been coming up, and I imagine it's a very common thing, is to say I saw X before I should have. Like
Yes.
like how many of us like, oh, I didn't see anything scary until my teen years when my ego was pretty intact and it was merely a scary thing I saw. You know, there's always the, yeah, I was too young to see the thing that I saw, right?
The only people I know for whom that's true are the people who were sheltered from media in general.
Right.
And although many of them discover things about themselves later in life that they were kept from, essentially, very few of those people, I think, go on to be horror fans. And I think there's something about horror, like a lot of speculative genres, that is easier to enjoy when your brain is still pretty plastic. And as an adult, you have disbelief and you have these ego defenses in place and you have the knowledge of what effects are and you know who the actors are and there are a million barriers between you and actually feeling scared in your body. So although it may have been technically before we should have seen it, the reality is we were at the perfect age to receive horror as it was meant to be received. Just unprotected, raw, in your face, you feel fear now.
Yeah, I think another thing that goes on that kind of rides with that is a lot of horror. There's not it's people early in their careers are not that famous, so you
It's
don't have the
true.
problem of like Brad Pitt's in this werewolf movie. You know, like it's just a person to you.
That's very true. It's either somebody whose career never got that big or somebody who got famous way later. Like if you look at Jamie Lee Curtis in the first Halloween, we didn't know where she was headed, and it's easier to disconnect from a non-famous face. I think about that all the time with the Blair Witch project, and those actors got really screwed, and everybody knows how the studio played fast and loose with their real names and their real identities, but it lent so much to the project that they were just college students. They were just people.
Totally.
Yeah.
Have you seen The Righteous Gemstones, Meg?
No.
Oh man, so it's not horror related at all, except for the connection to Danny McBride, who Mark hates. Uh, but it's basically about it focuses on these three adult children of a mega pastor and how terrible they are, having been raised with like the privilege of having
Ooh,
millions of dollars scammed from people.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite HBO shows ever. But there's a scene that is some really good character building where they're watching the Atreyu pulling the horse scene from Neverending Story, and
Yes.
they're like laughing.
Oh,
And it like marks them as such like sociopaths because of it. Yeah, it's such a good scene. I wish you had seen it.
that sounds like good writing to me because so many of us relate to that as one of the first representations of deep trauma that we could really feel. Because even as a child, if you haven't survived the death of a human near you, all of us has had a pet die. And Artek's drowning is so immediate. I mean, Atreyu's with him every step of the way. He watches his nostrils disappear. And all of us who've ever had to put down a dog know exactly what that feels like. So watching somebody be callous about that scene is just an enormous red flag. This person is a psychopath.
I would say that the writing of that show is phenomenal.
It sounds great. I'll have to look it up.
thanks, Meg.
Yeah, thanks. Great as always. I think like yeah, she's such a like a real writer that she just I could hear her talk about anything. I'm a fan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
ditto. Okay. So next we have, shall I just read this one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Next we have Peaches Christ. That is the drag alter ego of filmmaker Joshua Grannell. Joshua is a San Francisco based filmmaker, event producer, and cult icon known for hosting cult film events with legends like John Waters and Elvira. creating symphony collaborations with Edwin Outwater, mentoring drag stars such as Bob the Drag Queen and Jinx Monsoon. And Peaches Christ also directed the feature film All About Evil. And as we spoke of at the beginning of this episode, co-produces the immersive theater experience Terror Vault. Take it, Peaches.
Okay. So I have distinctive memories of watching two films that I think of as movies, and then one that was like on TV that I remember watching every year. The one that was on TV that I watched every year that I loved was called Frogs. And I think Frogs was exciting, but I'm not going to include that because I don't even think I thought of it as a movie per se. The two movies that I saw as a kid that I knew were movies I should not be watching, and they were both watched in basements in the suburbs of Maryland in the early 80s. One was Psycho. We were at a kid's house and I remember that it had been rented from the library. So I did not think, because back then you could rent VHS tapes from the library. And it felt like anything you rented from the library wasn't going to be very exciting because it didn't even come with the art on the box. They came in these plastic cases with the movie title really boring, written on it. Very generic. And so I didn't expect much. And then when it started and it was black and white, I thought, oh, this is going to be so boring. And we watched and we watched. And of course, I was entranced and I just loved it. And, I think because the kill comes early enough on, the most iconic kill comes on early enough on in the movie that, if you're a kid, you may not have tuned out yet. It gripped me. Ironically, especially in lieu of the Ryan Murphy series that's on right now. The other one that I watched at a sort of sleepover party was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That one, we knew we were doing something we weren't supposed to. We knew we were not allowed to watch that movie. And what I remember is I was the only kid that watched it from beginning to end. And the other kids either left because they didn't like it or they couldn't handle it, or they were more interested in, I don't know, playing whatever other game there was to play. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I remember having the same reaction that I had to Psycho as a young kid, which is like, this this is going to sound so horrible. This is who I am. I'm Ed Gein. No, I definitely was just inspired by filmmaking and actually understanding that both were movies. And while Psycho was very much a crafted movie where I could go and ask about Alfred Hitchcock and find out about Alfred Hitchcock, my parents introduced me to Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which was on TV. It was, in reruns and stuff. That was my first understanding really of a director. But then also understanding, and what I mean by that is that the fantasticness of the film is very present. Whereas with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I really felt like I had to go out and find the film part of it, meaning I wasn't even quite sure what I had watched was fake. I wasn't convinced it was just a movie. I thought, I think part of me thought maybe I had just watched a documentary. It's only now because of the stupid Ryan Murphy show that I'm like, oh my God, that's so funny that both those movies were inspired in some part by the same real life person. So anyways, that's why I'm so fucked up.
That's clear. Yeah.
I think Texas Chainsaw might have been the first movie I ever saw that had the inspired by true events.
Yeah,
ahead of
right.
it. And when you're under a certain age, you're like, obviously true. Like this is, you don't really, especially pre-internet, like back when, there would be like, you would just accept the rumor as true, like, oh, everybody in Guns N' Roses died.
Right.
Like just some dumb shit like that.
You're right. I guess the opening of that film and putting myself back in that age, well, I obviously did not know that they were inspired by the same true events. That's one thing that I didn't find out till way later, as a teenager, probably just reading books. But yeah, I bet that opening really, especially as a kid, especially not understanding, and really, well, also that film was one of the first to kind of do it that way, to be a hardcore horror movie that opens with a "this is inspired by true events" and this very sobering detective-like voice. Yeah, I bet that affected me more than I realized. Just like, I remember the way people reacted to the Blair Witch Project who were young. I was kind of rolling my eyes, like, yeah, of course it's not real, you idiots. But, people really believed it was real. We had the exclusive at the Bridge Theater, and I remember watching the audiences. That only lasted for about 2 weeks, but it's that thing where if you haven't experienced a style of media before and they convincingly present it, which I think Toby Hooper did, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre felt so real to me. And then that title, that it's inspired by true events, even though it doesn't say this is a documentary or whatever, my mind couldn't understand how something that felt so real could be filmmaking, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I also knew that I wasn't watching Faces of Death. So I think, you know, which at the time I thought was real. you know. But those are the two movies that I remember distinctly watching and realizing even the act of watching them at that age was transgressive. And then there are the few more, and they're very common. I wish I had a more unique answer. I wish I could tell you that, I watched, I don't know, some underground cool deep cut, and that really transformed me. I mean, I didn't discover Dario Argento till way later, I don't even think I had access to those movies. The other really common one is that my brother and I remember my aunt letting us rent whatever at a very, very young age. And we came home with The Exorcist, and as young Catholic kids, that was fucking mind blowing. So, the all those three movies plus Frogs, I know I'm adding, but that's the soup that I remember being exposed to at a very, very young age. On top of, regularly watching anything. Frogs was one of those that was like a Saturday matinee. And even before Movie Macabre, it was tradition to have monster movies, to have, old horror movies run Saturday afternoons, which is kind of weird, but that's how I grew up. And then, of course, when Movie Macabre was, reached Maryland and Elvira was showing different schlocky movies, I watched all of that. But nothing is as imprinted as Psycho or Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
I was going to ask you. I'm so glad you brought up Elvira because I know you were friends with her, and my earliest films are very connected with Morgus the Magnificent, so a horror
Uh-huh.
host. So I was wondering if how early like a horror host had influenced your taste because I find myself when I was young, I was more interested in Morgus than I was the movie he was presenting, and the same exact way with Elvira. As soon as I
Yes.
obviously I'm a young man, I was like, "Whoa!"
For a lot of young men, she was an awakening, one way or another, and which is fun as an adult to go with Cassandra, or I've been with Elvira at conventions and things, and you really can pick up someone's sexuality vibes and their sexual awakening by the way they approach Cassandra Peterson. They either grew up and wanted to be her like me, or they grew, or she helped them realize what their penis could do, and they literally try to tell her that, which is so awkward. Like, you were the first person I ever, had a real experience with when I was 12. So, yeah, Cassandra as Elvira and the concept of being a horror host. I mean, I can't, obviously I was greatly inspired by it. So, I was definitely more interested in Cassandra than I was the movies. Although I thought the movies were fun, but I wanted to hear her funny puns that she was saying about the aliens that were invading, from Mars or whatever.
Yeah, Peaches is the real deal.
Yeah,
I mean, just the podcast. Her podcast is great.
totally.
I mean, what's left to say?
That's fair.
So like we've interviewed a couple people now. Like, what was your first horror movie? I actually don't know this. Like after nearly 10 years of talking about horror movies, I don't know the answer to this.
Yeah. So I have a few just fluffy things. Like we all have a couple of things. Like I remember when I first saw the Phantom of the Muppet Show episode of the Muppet Show,
Mhm.
it gave me nightmares for a while. I was reading Mad Magazine and they had a spoof of Psycho, but this would have been in the 70s. I don't think I was reading a vintage one. For some reason, they covered Psycho in a
Mhm.
70s issue, and I didn't know what it was. And my uncle explained the plot to Psycho for me. That freaked me the fuck out, just hearing the plot of Psycho described. But really, when I think about it, the first encounter I had with true horror cinema, I don't know what it was. I was really sick and I couldn't sleep. And I got out of bed at about 4 a.m. and came down from my room and turned on the TV. And there was a woman on a slab, maybe a dining room table, don't know. And she was probably not wearing very much. In my head, she was naked, but it was TV. It's very unlikely, even though the rules on Canadian television are a little different about nudity. There's a man standing over her with an electric knife, like an electric carving knife. And he looks up to all his guests and says, "How do you take your meat, white or dark?" And he starts the electric knife and starts to cut into her. And that's the end of the scene or the movie, like credits or a commercial or something. That was it. So since then, especially as an adult, especially in the era of the internet, I've been desperately trying to find this movie. What was it? I haven't taken to Reddit or anything, which could be something to do. But there's also a possibility that it wasn't a movie, that it was like the local horror host in either like Buffalo, New York area.
like an interstitial gag.
Yeah, like, and I've looked this up. There were a bunch. There were a bunch of horror hosts in the Toronto area, which is where I lived at the time. And I looked them up and I was trying to get a sense of, oh, were they just doing in my head, it was this horrifying thing, but it might have also just been like a terrible looking mannequin and the horror host with an electric knife. And that's it, right? Or it might have been a really high production European film. I'm really unclear. If anybody's listening and they know the answer to this question, please share. But then also, alongside of that exact era, in the Toronto area was this children's TV show called The Hilarious House of Frightenstein. Vincent Price was in it.
Oh, cool.
But it was almost entirely one actor playing every character. And it was just these skits. And he played a vampire and a wolfman and a wolfman who was a DJ and a witch who was like a parody of Julia Childs, but she was, anyway, whatever, I'm rambling. It was a children's horror comedy TV show with the loudest laugh track you've ever heard. I highly recommend checking it out if you're really into horror, because it's such this weird anomaly out of Canada in the 70s. As is true with many people, I don't know what it was, but I feel like a lot of people get to go research and they find out what it was they saw, and I didn't.
Is this it? Is it Blood Feast from 1963?
Is there an electric knife in Blood Feast?
It seems like.
And does someone say, "Do you take your meat white or dark?" I'll have to watch Blood Feast. You know, I've never seen Blood Feast. Thank you for looking that up.
Yeah, who knows?
All right.
Yeah.
I may have my answer soon. Thank you for that.
We'll keep you abreast.
Why did your 20-second research on your phone overtake my years of looking for shit and coming up with nothing?
Well, I am like, to pat myself on the back, a master of research.
Yeah, it is kind of your job, I
yeah.
guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just good at it. I'm also a tech dude, so like it's my milieu, you know, looking stuff up and getting information about your dark secrets.
Gross.
Yeah.
I'm offended and I feel invaded. All right. Shall I introduce the next one?
Yeah. Who's next?
Carmen Maria Machado.
Okay.
All right. Well, Carmen Maria Machado is an award-winning author of Her Body and Other Parties and In the Dream House and the graphic novel that is so great, The Low Low Woods, whose genre-defying work in fiction, nonfiction, and criticism, published in outlets like The New Yorker, Granta, and Vogue, has earned her National Book Award and Guggenheim recognition and established her as one of the most influential voices in contemporary literature. Here she is.
So when I was very small, so before, I have no memory of this. My mother apparently left me, I was like a toddler. She left me with my father while she had to go run some errands. And she came home from her errands, and my dad was asleep in his chair, and the TV was on, and I was sitting at his feet, and my eyes were as wide as saucers, and I was watching Poltergeist, the movie Poltergeist. And what's funny is I don't have any memory of this directly. However, when I was growing up, I was plagued with images that I only many years later as an adult realized were from Poltergeist. So I would have nightmares about people peeling off their face. I'd have the nightmare about the clown doll under the bed, the tree coming through the window, like all of these like really vivid horror images, the goopy portal in the ceiling. So I had all these images in my mind that I did not understand where they were from because I had no memory of seeing this movie. And then when I was in my 20s, I went with my then boyfriend and we went and saw there's a theater in Berkeley that used to do like $5 throwback nights. And so we went and saw Poltergeist because I was like, oh, I've always wanted to see this movie. And I was just sitting in the theater, like pinned to the seat and just like my eyes. And I was like, oh my God, this is the movie. This is the movie. And like all the images were now in order and like made sense because suddenly they were in like a narrative context. But I was like, he was like, did not understand what was going on. He's like, were you scared of that movie? And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like this movie has existed in my consciousness for like basically my whole life. And I did not know where these images were from. And now I do. So that was sort of the first. And then I rewatched it a few years ago for a podcast that I was doing. And I was like, this is a great movie. Like I actually really like it. I think it's a really solid horror film. And it's just so funny to me that I encountered it in such a strange way. And just had it like free floating in my mind for like my whole life. I don't really have those nightmares anymore, but they were pretty bad when I was a kid. So
Yeah, can you see what this is sort of a like probing none of my business, I'm gonna ask it anyway
no,
question.
it's okay.
But like, can you see ways that it might have imprinted itself in ways outside of just like nightmares about the things from the movies, but you're like, oh, and then some sort of like more meta imprinting on your disposition, behaviors, something like that.
Well, I mean, as a kid, I really liked horror. I mean, like when I was a kid, I really was drawn towards horror. So I would like borrow Goosebump books from my friends and I would read like Christopher Pike and I read The Hot Zone when I was like 10 because I like found it at like a yard sale or something and didn't really understand. And then I was like terrified that Ebola was coming. Like I had this incredible appetite, but it was weird because I was a super anxious. I mean, I'm a very anxious adult. I just got diagnosed with OCD last year, which made a lot of things make sense to me, but I was a super anxious child but I would like seek out these texts and read them. And my mother would like confiscate them like pornography. She'd be like, what is this? Why I told you no more Goosebumps. And so then like I would be like, oh, I got it from like a friend at school or something. And then she would, make me take it back or throw it away or something. And so I find it really interesting because I've always been drawn towards horror, which I like. I mean, I don't know if that's because I saw Poltergeist when I was like 3, but I've also always been really afraid. It's like this kind of interesting push-pull where there's something about I once had an interviewer describe it as it's like something that changes your temperature. And it's like, yeah, I really liked work that changed my temperature, like work that made me feel something. And so, yeah, I mean, I had a lot of anxieties. I also saw like Ghostbusters at like a really early age, like when I was too young to understand it was a comedy, and Ghostbusters 2. And that scene where the baby is in the bathtub and she turns on the faucet and like that pink goop comes out in the second film. It's like the hate goop that's like flowing through the city. It's like I don't even remember exactly what the plot is, and my mom said that for years I actually was very afraid when she would go to turn on the faucet. For some reason, my brain turned it into blood, so I was always afraid that blood was going to come out of the faucet when I was like quite small. So yeah, and like also there's a lot of pink goop in Poltergeist as well. So yeah, I feel like these movies, it's like they both terrified me, but also like fed this like interest because clearly I was drawn to it, or I would have stopped seeking them out. But I also would watch horror movies on TV. Like I saw the second Candyman movie like way too young because my mom was out of the house, and I like turned on I think it was like the Sci-Fi Channel, or was that around when I was a kid? So some channel that showed horror movies. and Candyman 2 Return to the Flesh, which I've seen like 4 times because it was always on TV. So yeah, I feel like it's interesting because yeah, I've always been drawn towards it. Clearly, it's something that my body and my mind wanted while also being like really afraid of it. I'm sure there's a very interesting psychological explanation for why that is, but yeah.
Did your mom have a prohibition against these types of things as a principle, or for you noting the potentially negative effects it was happening to you?
Well, my mom was very against like I was not allowed to see PG-13 movies even after I was 13. Like I would sometimes babysit for kids who were allowed to see movies that were more intense than the movies that I was allowed to see. So I would like see PG-13 movies at children's houses that I was babysitting, and I'd be like, "Oh, this is what Jurassic Park is," or like, "This is what, whatever." So she was pretty against like things that she thought of as like adult or like inappropriate, but that was a fairly wide category. So like I was always having things taken away from me. And I actually, at some point, as a kid, because I read a lot and I eventually graduated to reading like adult books. And like once they got so big that my mother couldn't read them quickly, she sort of let them go. So I then ended up reading a lot of like, I read like tons of V.C. Andrews, like all the Flowers in the Attic novels. I read like all of those books way too young, like had no context for what was going on. My mother, I think, was just intimidated by like the size of them. So she was just like, oh, I'm sure it's fine. But yeah, she was generally sort of against just like things that felt too adult for us. And there were a lot of restrictions on TV and movies we could see and things like that. So I think it was both because I was having like terrible nightmares and like I read Night of the Living Dummy, like one of the Goosebumps books, and I didn't sleep for like a week, or I was up with the lights on every night. So I think part of it was practical and part of it was like, I want my child to be able to go to bed and be in the dark. And also it's weird because she's a little religious. It wasn't like a religious thing, but just things that were like adult, which I think she sort of thought like sort of put that into that category. It's like things that just weren't appropriate for kids.
Does that frame your relationship to horror as being slightly forbidden, or no, it's just been there for you the whole time, and the prohibition against it was kind of in a sense maybe immaterial to how you think about it?
I don't think I really think of it as a forbidden. I also am like the kind of person I am not the kind of person who thinks of things as I don't forbid myself anything. Really. So I feel like that sort of part of my brain isn't really like I'm not like, ooh, this is shameful but interesting. It's like I'm just really interested in it, and so I move towards it. So I don't think it's like operating from that place of prohibition. It's more like it's just always been like a medium that I've understood and like had a real appreciation for. And that like calms me down. I mean, when I was writing my memoir, which was like a very, very difficult book to write, very hard emotionally, every night I was like at this residency. I was by myself. I was like in the middle of the woods. I was watching like 2 to 3 horror movies a night to like go to sleep. And I mean, I watched some truly bottom of the barrel, like very bad horror movies. In fact, one time I watched one called Truth or Dare because I had seen a trailer for it. And like halfway through the movie, I was like, wait, in the trailer for this movie, everybody had really big, like creepy, like smiles. And I haven't seen creepy smiles. And then I was Googling it. Apparently there were 2 movies called Truth or Dare that came out within like a year of each other. And I was watching the other one. So I finished the one I was watching. And then I watched the other one, which was equally as bad and silly. But like, yeah, I feel like for me, horror movies are like a language. I watch them on planes, which also probably seems really crazy because like planes are very stressful places to be. But I'm like, it will center me if I can see like a demon coming out of the walls. It will make me feel safer on this flight, or make me feel like time can pass. I don't know. So at this point, it's just like so familiar to me. Because of that time that my dad was not doing his job and fell asleep while he was supposed to be watching me. And here I am, a horror writer decades later. It makes sense.
She's such a delight. I'm so bummed to have not been I had my fucking day job, grinding away.
It was really hard to schedule time with her, and I won out.
I know.
And you did not.
Yeah. But I was quite jealous of your conversation and like hearing it. It was pretty neat. But it also brought up that like one of my earliest horror movies, like Poltergeist for sure. I'm gonna also do the thing that everybody does, where you have like your 3 like other things that aren't thing.
But primarily Poltergeist, right?
If I was going to say what real movie was the one I saw early on, we talked about this in our episode with Peaches Christ when we covered Poltergeist, that it was famously a PG-13 movie. And so a lot of people saw it early. I still think, watching it now as an adult, that it deserves that rating. Like, I think it would be given that rating now, PG-13. But it has so many super memorable elements. I'm a lifelong Spielberg fan, and so it has the Spielberg light stuff in it, and I mean, I know like Toby Hooper directed or whatever, but like, come on, like I'm a Spielberg truther on this. I know that's not a popular opinion amongst horror fans.
Sorry, Beaches.
But
it's really interesting, that line between like, well, Toby Hooper was the director, but was going through something with substance abuse. And Spielberg did come in, and there are a lot of signature Spielbergisms in it. And depending on who you ask that was there at the time, it seems like it's unanimous, but it's not unanimous.
No, I mean, I to me, like the evidence that sort of supports it is like there's crew statements on both sides of this.
Right.
There's like Toby Hooper was there every fucking day, and then there's people like I got yelled at by Spielberg. Like just like there's like that whole like thing. But I think that like there was so much incentive for Spielberg to not have his name on it because of all the guild rules, like the Directors Guild rules and things like that.
Right.
And it just looks like a Spielberg film. There's just so much about it, like the mystical suburbs with the forest on the edge of town, the child's POV, the essential weirdness of the beyond, like all those elements, and Zelda, the dwarf is dwarves are just so compelling to children. But yeah, that was a great one. The thing that gave me fear before anything else, though, was the fucking 700 Club, man. Like my grandmother just had that shit on all the time, and I just mainlined the Revelations, like as a child. And
it's like The Walking Dead being screamed at you.
Yeah, and especially in the early 80s, like later on, I would be like really impacted by the Satanic Panic, but earliest memories are just you have like nuclear war, Revelations, Reagan, Antichrist. Like you think it's bad with fucking Peter Thiel's reptile ass. It's nothing compared to what it was in the 80s. And so that, and the thing about that stuff is like, it's based on a mythology that you live in if you grow up in a Christian household, so it feels even more real, especially to a child. And you're going to church and there's like adults going like, yeah, dude, it's fucking real. Like pack your bags, you're going to hell. But the earliest ghosty thing, and this is sweeter, is I had one of those Fisher-Price toys, the little camera things where you turn.
What are they called?
It's like a Fisher-Price film viewer.
If you can picture this thing, you put a cartridge in it, you put one eye up to it. It looks like a Super 8 camera, but it's not. It's like a Viewmaster, but you crank it.
Yeah, you crank it to play the film, and the film's like 40 seconds or something.
You just hold it up to the light, and the light is the projector bulb.
Yeah, it's a really like charming device. It like really captures your attention as a child.
When I was in art school, I was so determined to like make my own films and put them in it, but I just didn't have I think I was too lazy.
I'm surprised you and Andy haven't put out an album on that format.
I know, it's so good because it's either regular 8 or Super 8. It's just a really standard format of film, and you just make a loop inside the cartridge. Anyway, I had a lot of cartridges. I was really into it.
Yeah, but the thing I had was Lonesome Ghost, which is the 1937 cartoon. It's the 98th Disney cartoon. and it's Mickey's still voiced by Walt Disney, which is really cool. And I didn't see the cartoon for years. And it is super fun. It's classic 30s Disney. The ghosts look amazing. They're just like, they look like hobos kind of.
Yeah.
And the whole shtick is these real ghosts don't have anybody to haunt. So they call up some Ghostbusters who are Donald Duck, Goofy, and Mickey, and they come and there's just like ghost gags through the whole thing. A lot of people think it's what Ghostbusters is actually based on. And there's even a line where Goofy goes, I ain't afraid of no ghost.
Really?
Yeah. And that's where it's, it comes to the song and all that stuff. So it has like a really sweet place in my heart. I love 30s Disney animation so much. I mean, Walt Disney was a fucking genius. Like he invented a lot of technology that just made that shit happen. Like what we think of as perspective in animation kind of was developed by his people.
What came up for me when you brought this up is that film takes the format of so much early animation, at least all of the animation that I remember from my childhood, which would be like Looney Tunes, not so much Hanna-Barbera, but Disney shorts. The plots are often protagonist, antagonist, and it's just the antagonist is provoking the protagonist. And how does a protagonist respond.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's inverted. But the reason why I'm going through all this is I feel like there are two different types. There's the roadrunner. The coyote's always after the roadrunner, but the roadrunner is super stoic, does all the sort of passive martial arts moves so that the coyote always undoes himself. But then there's the Donald Duck format, which is to go hysterical every time and overcompensate. And all it takes with Donald Duck is for one little thing to go wrong and he goes overboard, right? And so much animation in the early days was based around this sort of thing. I mean, even Steamboat Willie is sort of about that. It's about like there's a protagonist and things go wrong and he loses his shit and is just trying to keep things normal. And it's hard for me not to reflect on that in our current era with online culture is you have a choice. Are you a Donald Duck or are you a Roadrunner? Are you stoic and let things pass through and let things eat themselves? Or do you let a little provocation make you so hysterical that you fall into the trap of what the provocateur was hoping you would fall into? Yeah. I don't think I'm overreading this. I think there's something there.
Well, I mean, like these things are based on like myths always, you know, like
Yeah.
Dali called Walt Disney the great American surrealist for a reason.
Yeah.
You know. Is the next one Daniel?
Yeah.
Do you think he's going to be upset if I call him a narco-Talmudic scholar?
I'm not editing that out.
Well, I'll just do his bio straight, but maybe we'll ask him and see if. So yeah, Daniel is a PhD in rhetoric from UC Berkeley. So he was a professor in my department when I was there, and I never took his courses because he was always scheduled opposite his mentor, and not my mentor, but my favorite professor of all time, Philippe Gutierrez. If you've heard me on this show ever, it's just me attempting to do his films of the fantastic course. Philippe Gutierrez was a great man, and it's a tragedy that he never wrote a book. And so, in addition to all these graduate seminars in critical theory at Berkeley, he taught at the San Francisco Art Institute. He's on tons of philosophy podcasts. He's like a super prolific blogger. He wrote a really fun book called Reading the Way of Things Towards a New Technology of Making Sense, which is published by Zero Books. And he's also one of our most frequent guests.
Yeah. Got him on a lot.
Yeah.
Here we go.
We weren't allowed to watch TV as kids. I watched too much TV when my mom was alone, you know, and they didn't know what to do. They stuck me in front of the TV. Then they threw it out. But there was one TV in their bedroom, and there was that period, you know, like us latchkey Gen X kids, and they were both working out of the house. And I put on, I think it probably like the 4:30, you know, after school movie. And I don't know what it was. I'll tell you what it was because I researched it. But there was some kind of horror movie. It took me a little bit to figure out. It's kind of this, you know, American Victorian era kind of thing. And in one scene, like breakfast is served and they open the tray and there's a severed head. And to this day, I just conjure that moment and my whole body kind of like shakes. So I researched the shit. Thank God I Googled on the internet years later so I could actually track down the movie. It's called The Curse of the Living Corpse, 1964, and actually stars Roy Scheider, right? Which at the time didn't mean anything to me. You know, it was probably, I don't know, 8. But it was so absolutely terrifying. I couldn't figure out why anyone would want to watch something like this. But I learned some things. I learned about affect. I learned that there was this force that could come through these movies, right? Not just giggling at, you know, my house, Woody Allen was, you know, what you watch in New York in, you know, the 70s. But this was a different register of what this art form kind of was. And I kind of learned, it's like, oh, because I was used to kind of really like watching things, right? But I learned there are certain things, certain affective transmissions that come out of certain movies that are often called horror movies that I didn't want overtaking me. I was like, I couldn't even figure out why somebody would want that. So I remember years few years later, right, The Shining comes out. And, for some reason, there's a little buzz around it, maybe in my house and the world. And maybe it was like 2 years after it was released. And I was at some friend's house and it was on network TV. And I was so relieved that there were like commercials. But I also learned to kind of watch, and I realized I could control how open I left my aperture. Right? I learned the beginning of like, I don't have to give generously to this thing, right? Because I don't know what it's going to do to me. I was so afraid. I was kind of, like a dog when they're nervous, they kind of look side eye at you. That's how I learned I could begin to kind of, control my aperture, control that filter, control how much I let in, but also that there was this possibility in cinema that I didn't really get. Like we watched, years later you watch like Cheech and Chong and we watched, fun movies and had an experience with movies, but horror movies were clearly playing a different game. Right? They were going for something that, akin to one register of them is akin to like pornography, right? It's going for a very visceral, profound, immediate effect, working you over. It's not like, that's a real thinker. Although horror movies often are that as well, that I would come to learn when I get to college and I finally see Sam Raimi, right? And I see the two Living Dead movies, especially the second one.
Evil Dead. Yeah.
Evil Dead. Sorry.
Yeah.
Evil Dead. And then I was like, oh, now I get it. Now I fucking get it. And then with Blue Velvet, and I got that there was a play in fear and in and then what the genre allowed in the distribution sort of both affect and the body, just the way it could distribute what it is to be a body. And Evil Dead too, right? But he's like wrestling his own arm. I was like, fuck, this is a whole reorganization. Right? And what other genre, what other form ever takes that liberty? And so that was I was like, oh, now I get why all the cool kids in black were into horror movies, right? Because there was a smartiness and a kind of fuck you to sort of bourgeois propriety and the totality and closure of the body, and that it could also be really funny. I realized that horror wasn't always scary at that point.
And did all of these realizations draw you into them, or just sort of get you to appreciate them, but it's not going to make you wear black and join the goths?
The fear thing still.
Yeah.
Why would I want that?
You still feel that way?
Yeah, I was like, why do I want to be afraid? Like, I'm afraid enough. Like, I'm a fucking Jew. Like, life is scary. Like, why do I want to invite more of this into my life? I like being unsettled, right? Which is a different thing, right? And again, Lynch, who I think I grew up as a horror movie director, right? In the sense that there's always, there's always that tension of what's going to happen, and I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be good.
Yes.
Pretty sure something weird and not savory is coming around the corner. But in that unsettling, I was like, oh, well, of course, there's an incredible possibility in that. Right. That's all I ever want. Burroughs is my guy in literature, right? Like, I don't want to be assuaged, right, by my art. I want to be unsettled by my art. But I don't really want to be afraid. I don't really know the terms of the genre. I know it's a genre that's become very sort of self-reflexive, right? And then there are those movies you turned me on to, actually, the Dale and Tucker.
Yeah.
Right, which is just fantastic.
So good.
But I know the Scream movies began to do that, right? The sort of playing on the self-referentiality of the genre, which then becomes kind of interesting in that, it becomes a postmodern move, right? Of we know we're a genre, we're performing a genre, right?
Yeah. I think something that's unfortunate is that this self-reflexive postmodern turn is now the dominant voice in horror. Now everything is that, and when it doesn't happen, it feels weird. Like if it breezes across something familiar but doesn't give the wink and the nod, it feels like, well, wait, they forgot to make sure that I know that they know that I know that they know. And, I mean, that's kind of everything about postmodernity is we're now in this tyranny of decentralization
Yeah, but what
at
they
all
do is
times.
rather than making that meta move or that fold over of the form into the thing, right, of the structure into the art, which is unsettling, which become the opposite, right? It just becomes another fucking thing to repeat, another cliche.
Yep.
And so it actually undoes the very power it had when it first started, right? The sort of self-awareness. You get it in the Coens, who I know with Big Sam Raimi, they have that whole relationship, right? You see it in Blood Simple, right? There's all their films, very self-consciously about genre.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Coen Brothers because I just had this keyed up in my mind was even some horror movies, if they're not explicitly referencing the film, they're referencing shots from other films. And if I don't know if you guys saw Weapons, but the last bit of Weapons is completely inspired by the end chase in Raising Arizona. And like once you know that, you're like, oh my God, this is exactly a Coen Brothers movie at the end. And it just makes it better. It's just like this genre jumping.
But it is, I mean, God, I'm just watching Licorice Pizza, a little treat for my birthday, rewatching PTA's film,
Again.
right? Yeah, and he like all these guys, Tarantino too. They just take moments from films. So I'm watching Licorice Pizza, and I wish I had a better understanding of the history of cinema because I know he's quoting movie after movie after movie. The way that crowd moves, the way that was backlit. So I think that's just part of cinema. But what's cool about horror is that at the pop level, they embrace the kind of artiness, right? They embrace a little of that avant-garde. So I've never still come really around to horror movies, and I I dated someone who was into the A24 thing, and I saw some of those, and I don't know, A24 kind of rubs me the wrong way. It's sort of like fake intelligence, fake sophistication is like that. Like when people say Jodie Foster is smart in Hollywood, she's smart. I was like, what bar do they have in Hollywood that's fucking smart? But when someone takes that mantle and that becomes Christopher Nolan makes philosophical movies, like what the fuck? He's like a freshman in 101 philosophy in college, and fail him every time. So that's why I feel about a lot of A24, other than Moonlight.
I think A24 is the rainbow grocery of horror.
There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, or worse, Whole Foods, right? While pretending it's rainbow.
That's interesting.
But I don't know. I'm not versed enough in the genre to really say, the move, but they feel neutered. Yeah, I'm still not warmed really to the genre. Like I don't want to be scared, but I'm glad that I'm glad I love pornography, right? I like art forms, cinema, trying to operate on these other registers. Besides, all the shit I love, Godard and Cassavetes and all that shit, which I love. But then, porn, horror, that's art too.
That is classic Daniel Coffeen.
Yeah.
Like everything great about him in a few minutes. Yeah, one of my favorites. I'm so sad that I never got to take an actual course with him at Berkeley. But we did chat
You
a
got the
little bit in
second
the
best
halls.
thing.
Yeah, it's so funny that I wonder how many of his students he goes on their podcasts.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I wasn't a student, but
But yeah, totally. And next we have Stephen Intermill. He is the director of the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Cleveland, where he curates artifacts from figures like Raymond Buckland and Aleister Crowley to celebrate witchcraft, magic, and outsider art. He's also a former curator of A Christmas Story House and Museum, which is the museum about and of the movie A Christmas Story. It's amazing. His passion for the arcane grew through his experimental synth project, Teleoccult Powers, which I remember from when it was active. Here's Stephen.
I have a tough time with this because I can't really think of a movie that really scares me, right? I do think about like certain parts of like the movie Ringu or even the American version Ring that I find completely freaky. I have a fond memory of watching the movie The Omen with my aunt on Swedish television when I was probably like 13 or 14. But I think what was more wild about that was we watched Public Image Limited live in Tokyo right beforehand. So it's kind of like a double dose of just what is happening in this world. The world makes no sense to me whatsoever. Because trying to understand something like Public Image Limited live in Tokyo when you're like 11 years old, and we didn't have the media diets that people do now that completely like cracked my head open. But maybe someone listening to this will know the movie that terrified me. All right. My mother's Swedish. We spent a lot of time in Sweden when I was a kid. And there was a cabin in the woods. They call them a stuga. And that's just kind of where people go, unwind. Everybody pretty much has a house in the forest. And there was a very small TV. And the house that we would go to didn't have electricity. So it had to have been battery operated. And it was a very small television. And I remember it had a bit of a green tint to it. And it was at night. I'm watching this film, and it just, all I remember is like lunar landscapes, cutting to maybe some people in a space cockpit that are very concerned about the situation. And maybe, some people, like in Houston, right? At the command center. And it's just cutting back and forth. And it must have been around 1981, 82 when this happened. So think it's a few years earlier that this movie was produced. Black and white television, kind of a green tint to the screen. So I was watching it. And, like I was just saying a minute before, when I was younger, we didn't have real media literacy, right? You kind of had no idea what you were looking at when you were a kid. So this could have been a documentary. This could have been a science fiction movie. It could have been happening live. Like somehow this television was like tapping into whatever was happening. And I just remember watching this and looking out the window and seeing my family outside. They had a bonfire going, my cousins, my aunt, my grandmother, and just kind of going back and forth between the two in a completely otherworldly state. And this is the thing when I'm like deep in the woods today and I kind of get a little bit freaked out, I have the same taste of anxiety that I did when I watched whatever this was. I don't know. Maybe it was even like Space 1999, but I wasn't quite getting that. It was just, who knows what it was, but that was by far the one thing that completely has put me on edge for 40 some years. But now I'm remembering one other thing that freaked me out when I was a youth. They were showing Helter Skelter, the Charles Manson television docu-series on local television at like 11:30 p.m. I saw an ad for that. And the guy that played Charles Manson was so unhinged. And just video of him in court being like, "Wah." I remember being like, oh my gosh, the whole world is filled with people like this.
Do you think those things like ended up inspiring you in the path you took? Did some aspect of any of those direct the rest of your life?
I don't know, because like I grew up and I'm not that worried about Charles Manson people. And I'm not really concerned with what's going on in space. But all that maybe just kind of helped form the general sense of anxiety that I walk around with at all times. The world is completely unhinged.
Man, this isn't my earliest scary movie, but probably the one movie that affected me the most and still has an influence on my personality was The Day After. That movie that we all had to watch with its terrible
Yeah.
special effects. Like that was probably the thing I saw that had the most lasting effect on me as a person.
I could see that because you do have kind of like an apocalyptic worldview.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of probably not hungry for it, but want to be ready for it. But I wouldn't quite put you in the prepper camp, but probably
Well,
more in the,
he is in a cabin in the woods as we speak.
yeah. So maybe not, but like not going out first thing camp, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm
So
technically not a prepper because my end of the world plan is to be a raider, you
yeah, yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah.
So,
That's like a good style, honestly. Probably better fashion, better music going on behind you is what you're doing. Is what you're
mhm.
doing. Cool driving, kind of exciting tunes versus just the anxiety of everything coming at you. You want to be part of the people going. So
Yeah,
I
pretty
respect
much.
that.
Yeah, Danny McBride at the end of This Is the End. That's the vibe.
Yeah. What about you,
I,
Mark? What's your end of the world plan?
End of the world plan. Um, I'll have like one hand on Chad's shoulder and I'll kind of have my head hunched down so that he's absorbing whatever's coming his way. I'll pick up the
Well,
remains.
Mark is going to be the Channing Tatum character in that relationship.
Okay. All right.
Going back to earlier, it's interesting when we think of precedent setting moments in our childhood and we create narratives or don't create narratives like, did that inspire the anxieties of my life to come, or do I have these anxieties and now that I think of it, I most remember this one thing that maybe that contributed to it. It's sort of a chicken or an egg thing,
Yeah.
like just because we remember things doesn't mean they were actually pivotal or instrumental.
Oh yeah.
It might just happen to be the thing we remember, right?
I could have just watched 2 minutes of a bad sci-fi movie on a screen and feel like, oh, well, I'm gonna go outside and, see my cousins. But chances are there was a good stash of Mad magazines in that house. So I probably would have
Right.
just went and like checked out the Mad magazines. No, I was at
Yeah.
that age.
It's
Yeah.
interesting you mentioned like media literacy and Mad Magazine. I would argue that the media literacy that I have, and a lot of us probably have, is from Mad Magazine. And so I've like whatever I've looked at, I've kind of always had a parodic, like a parody sort of
Oh
eye
yeah.
towards it because of Albert E. Newman, really, you know.
And you know, Spiro Agnew. What a problem. Yeah. Yeah, no, Mad definitely helped shape like the way I see the world around me as a there's a lot of I don't know. I see that in everything pretty much. Just this distorted, grotesque view of America
Yeah.
constantly for me to roast.
Yeah, and if you think about like National Lampoon is a thing, and then Harvard, and like obviously the CIA are involved in that. So like, we're just down that Manson rabbit hole again.
Yeah. Yeah, truly. So, are there scary movies today? Like, are there scary movies for adults? Like, you're talking to people and they're talking about scary movies and whatever, but can adults really be scared by movies or do they get unsettled?
I don't know. I wonder if horror movies have the same effect on adults that can we have an exorcist any longer?
Yeah.
Can a piece of art unhinge adults at this point? It's hard to say. There's definitely a lot of social movements and moments that adults get freaked out about.
Have you guys listened to or read? I read it, then I listened to it, the William Friedkin bio.
No, that seems like it would be a good one.
Oh, yeah, but like the 3 chapters on The Exorcist are pretty amazing. And then he talks about getting really into Tangerine Dream, which is pretty ace. You forget about how The Exorcist, like that was the biggest advertisement for the Catholic Church that there had been in a real long time. Conversion
Yeah.
rates were through the roof because you're watching this movie and it's just so unhinged, right? Like the whole thing. And I talk about this at the museum a lot, is people weren't really freaked out by Ouija boards until that movie came out. And that's really the thing that put people over the edge, where they don't need these portals to hell in their living room anymore.
Yeah, I just find it so fascinating the way, like, you know, when thinking about someone like Stephen, who now has this role
Mhm.
in scholarship, essentially, and
Yeah.
in keeping an archive of all of this shit that you and I are so interested in. Like, how did he get there? How did this happen? How does the world make a Stephen Intermill? And I love just this little slice of that story.
Yeah, it's so like he and I were like in New Orleans like around the same time, and just so many similar interests. It's I think it's pretty cool that he and I, oh, you as well, but like to know him is really fun.
Yeah.
And then I just wonder, like, he is now like this thing where he lives. Like the museum's like a considerable thing, and it's important, and rock bands stop there and visit. It's just, like I wonder, does he become like the new Raymond Buckland in a way?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he sort of is, but he's also part of a legacy, and part
Yeah.
of preserving that legacy. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Is that it?
I think that's it.
All right. Well, I mean, thanks to all of our guests for joining us. And also, wait, did we have episodes with all of them except for Carmen Maria Machado? Go back and check out the episodes that we did with all the rest of our guests. And yeah, what else do we have to say? Happy Halloween.
Yeah, happy Halloween. Get out there, practice the dark arts.
Daddy's got to work now.